My name's Conrad Pires. I'm one of the co-founders of Picosat Systems, together with Stuart, who is in the audience there. So there's the two of us with the company. Thanks, Tom, who's out there. We pretty much agree with everything that he's said when it comes to the commercialization of PocketQubes. So what I'm going to do today in the next 20 or 30 minutes is talk about commercializing challenges that we have with our company and with PocketQubes from an Australian perspective. Now, it is from an Australian perspective, but I think it's going to be relevant to everyone. So, go ahead and start. So where we are, we like to say, we're Western Australia's first small satellite solutions company. So Western Australia is one of the states of Australia, and in fact, that's about a third of Australians in that picture, and that's Western Australia. We're isolated city, where I think we're this isolated world. We're very happy to be here and actually talk to people in space. We can't tell you how happy we are. And the Australian space industry and economy is interesting, and so is the Western Australian space industry and economy. And I'll touch a little bit on that. For a developed nation, don't laugh at us, but we should be a lot further than where we are, but things are changing, and as a nation, so I'll touch on that. So why space? So besides Stuart and myself being, well, I don't want to say space nerds because we're kind of cool, but don't laugh. But that passion or that interest in space is one of the reasons that we have this startup company. Another reason is we want to make space accessible and affordable to everyone. So with the advances in technology, with new space or space 2.0 or entrepreneurial space, there's that ability that we can make space a lot more usable for everyone. So again, I'm preaching to the converted. This presentation and what I talk about in here is along the lines of what I talk about to people in Australia, in Perth, when I'm trying to promote what we do with PocketQubes and with small satellites. So essentially what I'm saying here is kind of the message that I give in Australia. Now there's another reason that we're interested in our company, and that's this. Space is worth $50 billion today, and in a few years' time, well, in a decade or two, almost $1 trillion. So to be part of this economy that's growing very quickly, at the early stages of it is a fantastic opportunity, not just for us as a company, but also for our customers. They're able to get at the early stage and do things that they have the benefit of being a part of all of that money. The satellite industry today, so out of the $345 billion, it's $250 billion. So the satellite industry makes up a huge part of the space economy globally. It's a reason that we're part of this. And with PocketQubes, as the previous presenter talked about, there are a lot of advantages there. It's come about from a minimization of knowledge, and we see that as well. It's not just the money, but it's important to talk about these values when you're talking to customers and trying to convince them that small satellites are the way to go, and then PocketQubes are the way to go. Because I guess in Australia we're not so focused on space yet, and so when you talk about it, people don't really know what it means to them from a how's it going to benefit me point of view. It's a very big slide, but it's quite an interesting one, and this just shows what's going on in space. Right now, in those different verticals, you could use satellites for spacecraft. We could do some in-space services, space resources, space energy. There's a whole range of things. So what this slide shows from one of these research companies is that there's a lot of possibility with space today. And again, in Australia, speaking to people, that's what we're trying to portray and show that there's some real value there that they can make a use of. you can see all the logos from companies there. There's real companies doing stuff. So hopefully a persuasive slide. So I was around in the 1990s. I'm sure a lot of you here weren't, the younger students, but the internet back then had a whole range of possibilities, and space today is like that. And at least when you talk to customers or talk to people in Australia and you make that comparison, a lot of them were around back then, and they can see that, well, look at the internet today and what we have. Space will go that way as well. So let's jump into the challenges that, as a company, that we're facing. So, of course, smaller mass, launch more, constellation, swarmed. It's all been talked about before, and that's all true, and we all believe that. But as I mentioned, we're trying to, in Australia, to show the value of just using space, and particularly satellites for our potential customers and for potential users. Here's a slide that, from another slide deck that I use, and you know, we're using readily available technology. It's cheaper to build, quicker to build. So trying to get that message across. There's a bunch of other slides associated with the slide deck, which talk about small satellites. But this is an example of how we're trying to persuade people back home to get on board and have a look at what we're doing. Now, Andrew talked about this a bit earlier on. He had a whole list of potential applications. Here's a very interesting diagram that kind of breaks down in major categories the types of applications that you can use with small satellites. Now, this is where we start to be able to influence our potential customers by actually showing them what they can do and the value that they're going to get out of it. So up there, you've got things or machine-to-machine learning, machine-to-machine communication. You've got Earth observation-related applications. There's basically a whole range of applications. What are we trying to do when it comes to application? What am I to say to our customers in Australia or potential customers when it comes to applications? Well, Australia's pretty big, as you saw from that first picture, and we have a lot of empty space. So we're trying to focus on things that matter to customers and industry in Australia, and specifically in Western Australia today. So Western Australia is very good at resources. So mining, we do a lot of mining, and oil and gas. Perth is an oil and gas hub, one of the oil and gas hubs from around the world. In recent times, the key prices of both oil and gas and minerals, particularly iron ore, have died. So it's become a challenge for those industries. So we're looking at seeing how can we help those industries become more efficient, and can we do that through app-based technology? And that is one way of, again, trying to persuade and influence our potential customers as to, you know, having a look at it and potentially putting something in place, solution in place that we can provide them, hopefully based on PocketQubes. So we're thinking globally. Satellite solutions, you know, you can apply it to the whole of the world once you've got a constellation up there, but we're acting locally. So oil and gas. So challenges. So a bit's been talked about this morning. Launch. So launch is a challenge, and Vector Space and Alba are helping to make it less of a challenge, and so that is exciting. Options that we have as well, besides dedicated launches, is of course ride sharing, and then the potential for using motherships or space tugs or things like that to go and maneuver our spacecraft to where they need to go. So we're talking to different people in the industry to see what they can do for us. So it is a challenge, but it's great to hear from the conversations this morning that that challenge of being able to get our little satellites into space is becoming less so. Testing. Now, I'm not going to move into Stuart's presentation on the technical side, but in Western Australia, we don't really have any good space testing facilities. So we have to fly over to the East Coast to use facilities. So we're trying to see, from a commercial perspective, is there a cost-effective way, commercially, that we can do something in Perth? So that's another challenge we have, and that's how we're trying to address it. We've been speaking to universities to see if we can use different components and test equipment to essentially do the testing that we need to do for satellites. Telecommunications. So with swarms of satellites in space, how do we get the data back home or back down to the ground? So that's a challenge. So we're looking at more ground stations. So Australia, and particularly Western Australia, has very good weather. So we're ideally located to have a lot of ground stations there, especially for satellites in polar orbit. We're also looking at, well, what can we do in space? Can we reduce the amount of data we have to send back to Earth, and therefore make our constellations more efficient? So, can we have some onboard intelligence on those satellites to be smart about what it is that they're sending back, for example, from an Earth observation perspective? Value-added services. So I talked a bit about just now about what we're trying to do on the satellites. Essentially, with satellite constellations, much like was mentioned earlier on, you're going to get data generated, and that's going to come back. Now, with that data, you're going to have a lot of ability to look into it and look for other patterns. So you can put it through machine learning, artificial intelligence, other types of processing, and pull out even more information than what you can see. For us, we see making what viable more by adding additional value-add services such as processing and analysing data to provide even more information than what's there. Now we come to some of the more challenging parts in Australia. So our legislation regarding space, of course, that comes about from the various UN entities that we're all signed to it tonight, and it imposes a lot of regulation on us. Now, what's good at the moment, or in the last year or so, this is being reviewed. The federal government says that there is a change coming with space, and stuff like our company. We don't want to be spending hundreds and thousands of dollars just to launch something that costs way less than that to build. So that's the process at the moment. As a result of that, we hope that the risk profile for the insurance that we have to pay associated with what we want to do because of the regulations and the legislation and the treaties down. And so that's a challenge for us as a startup. We're, what's the term, funds free? We don't have a lot of cash. So how we can minimise to get things into space is very important. The good news is we're finally going to get a space agency. We're the last developed nation in the world, and getting a space agency. So in 2 weeks' time, there will be, end of March, beginning of April, there will be official release of information, documentation from the government that will list out how that space agency is going to work. And that will be the start of April. In May, we have our federal budget, where money is planned, and we'll let you know how much space agencies. It's a really good time to be in Australia at the moment because things are starting to change, and there may be potential for us as a space startup to make use of what the space agency might do. Now, the space agency is not going to be like ESA. It's not going to be like NASA. It's probably going to be something smaller, but it's great that we've actually got an overall body, a coordinating body in Australia that will hopefully take the space industry and economy forward. So we're really happy about that. And so are a lot of other people that work really hard to get to this point. Australia has, for whatever reason, hasn't bothered with the space side of things. And I think it's the commercial aspects that are helping them to change their mind. So in 2 weeks' time, we're looking forward to it. Perth, that's where we live. Talk a little bit about what we're doing there back home. So Perth is only about 2 million people, and big industries there mentioned before are resources, oil and gas, and mining. With the downturn, because of commodity prices, there's a lot happening in the startup world to see how can we diversify what's going on in Australia, or in Perth specifically. Hasn't so much in focus space, it's just been focused on technology. So we're one of the first space companies to set up there and try and, again, I guess another source of potential revenue and an industry within Western Australia, within Perth. So what's important to us? What are we trying to do? So we're engaging with industry. We really need to talk to industry. It's great to talk about the technical aspects of this. That's important, but for industry, they want to know what they're going to get out of it. How much money are they going to save? How much is it going to cost them? Why will it be better for them? So we're speaking to industry, all types of industry, not just mining and oil and gas, but we're also trying to speak to others as well. Those are our primary targets, to see what problems they have and what we potentially could solve for them. Now, that list that Andrew put up earlier on in his presentation, which had almost, I don't know, it's like 20 or 30 applications there. Those are some of the applications that we can potentially provide to these companies. So industry is part of what we're trying to do, speaking to them. Australian government. So I mentioned before that things are changing. We're at a space agency. Our legislation to change as well to make things cheaper for us to operate in that industry. But with the Australian government and the Western Australian government, we've engaged with them to say, hey, we're a space company, we're here, we're trying to develop our capabilities in Western Australia, and in turn we will have a flow-on effect to the economy and make our state a smarter state. So we're using that, which has been proven, where you have space industry flowing on intelligence back to universities, and then from the universities it then goes out into the business world. So we're taking that approach, both at a federal level and at a state government level. Now, when we first put the startup together, I don't think we thought that we'd have to speak to government and try and influence them, but it's one of the many things that I'm talking about here that we have to do to hopefully get these into space and used in a really good way and a profitable way. Universities. We're speaking to universities. Now that's really, really important. A lot of really smart things happen in universities. A lot of really good research happens in universities. And our local universities, so the one I recently graduated from, I'm speaking to them, we have a relationship with them, and we're exploring with some of their researchers what we might be able to use. So there's, they're doing optical communications, they're doing quantum clock timing in space, they're doing infrared sensors. So these are all technical things, but by understanding the technical that they're working on, we can then, through our conversations with industry, work out how to apply that and create an application that customers hopefully will purchase. So talking about these relationships. So we're the International Centre for Radio Astronomy Research. So you've probably heard of the Square Kilometre Array. So a multi-billion-dollar radio astronomy shared between South Australia and Australia. Now, most of it in Australia will be built in our state, in Western Australia. And ICRA is responsible for all of that work. And so we have a relationship with them. They, besides just radio astronomy, want to be seen and are seen as a leader in space. Now, yes, they're research, but generally in Australia, if you're doing something and you're doing it really well, you could be considered a leader. So they want, they're seen as being a leader in space. They want to do things more than just radio astronomy. Of course, things that they want to do will be of benefit to radio astronomy, but they're looking to think a little bit broader and relationship with them, and we're exploring what we can do satellite-wise with them. How can we help them? That's just a picture of the Square Kilometre Array and what it will look like when it's actually built. There's a cursor at the moment. It's called the Murchison Wide Array, which has been built, and this will be coming soon. Just of interest, the amount of data that this is going to generate, we're looking at terabytes of information coming out of here, and they're developing smart software that will throw a lot of that, and I think is important at the antenna, and then send it back to huge data centres in Australia, in Perth. So there's a lot of, I guess, AI software being developed in Perth and in Australia, and I mentioned before that we want to analyse our data as well. So there's a benefit for us there to address the challenge of how do we make our company and PocketQubes relevant to other people by making use of local knowledge that's being built up, and this relationship we have with ICRA. We may be able to do just that and influence our potential customers. So with our relationship with them, we did a zero-G collaboration, which is pretty cool. The deployer that we built is just out there on the table, and you can have a look at it. It's pretty ingenious in the materials that we've used. I'll let you have a look and work it out for yourself. But they took not this one, but there's another satellite out there onto a zero-gravity flight, and this was the result. So we have a picture or a video of a PocketQube being deployed in weightlessness with its antenna deploying. So from a visual perspective, it's a really powerful thing. A press release was released when this happened back in November. So an ICRA Picosat press release, and it made a few media channels. But it was really important. The relationship that together, Picosat systems with other institutions can hopefully do some really good things together. And I got to say, it's a really good marketing video. So we like to show that, pull it out my phone and show people, and it's cool. So talking about relationships. So we ran an expert panel of startups, 2 space startups, and space researchers. So really professors at the University of Western Australia working on areas that are relevant, some which I mentioned before, optical communications, infrared sensors, etc. And we ran that together with Woodside, which is an oil and gas company, a huge oil and gas company in Australia. So again, we're trying to, in order to influence people about this, we're trying to do it through relationships and connections within industry, within research and institutions, and it was a good event. But what it really comes down to is, for us as a commercial company, is our business model. So all those applications that we've been about, that Andrew mentioned, that I've showed you in a little wheel diagram at the start, they're fantastic, but we need to make sure that we can sell those and actually make revenue out of it. So for example, from an Earth observation perspective, we're looking at the cost per square kilometre of imagery. Can we bring that down? How can we bring that down? I mentioned before doing some intelligence processing on the satellite. Maybe that's one way of reducing the amount of images you need to send down while maintaining the high quality. So it's something we're looking at the moment. But the business model is super important, and everyone we speak to, I guess when it comes to money and funding, want to know about what our business model is. So we're in the verifying a few business models, and I think I'm going to continue to explore and play with it. And fundamentally, we'll get to a point very soon where we have this business model where we can just show people this is what we're doing, and have great customers and potential investors. Funding. So what I just mentioned, the business model follows into funding. We're also this is our technology demonstrator. This is about 2/3 of the way done. We need about $100,000 to launch into space. Alba do have a slot available where we're missing $100,000. So from a funding perspective, we're looking at government grants. We're looking at potentially going to look at crowdsourcing, but we're looking at ways of how can we get money for this tech demonstrator, which has no commercial impact, but a good technical impact and a reputational impact for us. And that's something we're exploring. Government grants in Australia, there are a number of them, but they're not that easy to get a hold of. There's a number of conditions, and we're exploring that. Yesterday, Stuart and I were over at STech, and we were talking to ESA and their Business Innovation Centre, and we were drooling at the mouth because of all the money that they just throw around to potential space innovation. Will that happen in Australia as a result of the space agency? I think probably not to the level that we'd like, but really for us right now, it's up to us to generate revenue or generate the funding that we need to get this proof of concept up into space, as well as to work out the model to get that overall funding coming in. You can bootstrap, but because it's hardware, and to put hardware into space takes money, it's a little bit hard to really bootstrap. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is something we can do. How else are we getting our message out to people about us as a company, about small satellites, about how it might be useful for them? So we're doing a number of things. So we picked up an Innovator of the Year award last year, so an encouragement award, and the funding from that actually got us here today. So we're pretty happy about that. And of course, now that we're here, we're able to look at all the new innovations that are going on with all of you, and we take some of that back with us. We're participating in the Perth startup scene. You know, we're there. We're trying to make sure that we're seen, and we were fortunate enough to receive an award. And so that was really, so again, getting in places from a startup perspective. So we're recently on radio. So Stuart and I are in a radio studio, chatting to the presenters. Now, completely different audience. That audience there aren't just money. They're probably just your ordinary person living a really great life. But again, if we can get that message across, it's useful because you know who they're going to tell and how widely that can. So that was quite a good thing. So we were on a blog recently. So we did I think it was like, what was it, like an hour and a half interview that got chopped down to 30 minutes, which was which the lady who did a really good job. But on that podcast, there is it's us and one of the Mars One candidates. You know, Mars One, that program to send astronauts to space. Yep. How long? A few minutes. Yep. And he's quite well known in Australia. So we're associated with him in the blog means again that we're able to reach even people. So you know, it's reputation by association. There was an oil and gas conference last week, just before I flew out, and I spoke there on space and what we're doing. So oil, you think, well, most people there are interested in drilling and pipelines and things like that, but the applications we talked about are relevant to oil and gas. So we were there at this conference talking about what we could do. At the university, talking about to groups of students about exactly what is possible in space. Again, these guys are going to graduate in a few years' time. They may end up working for us, but even if they're going to spread that space message. There was a networking event, so there's starting to be some space networking events in Perth. So we've spoken there as well, again, with different people, both public and industry, that's to those, telling them what we're doing. These are two accelerators or incubators in Australia that are that we've worked with, and in fact, I'm currently going through the Moonshot X accelerator program. It's great, it's a startup program, but we get to engage with people in the space industry. And these are some recent happenings that have occurred in Australia, in Perth, and that is networking events for space. So we're again involved in that. So look, we're basically trying to look at multiple avenues to engage with industry, government, and researchers to get a message across that we have the potential to solve their problems with some solutions. And I did a Google search on Latin, and basically what that means down there, pari passu ad astra, is that moving together to the stars. So basically, in Australia, we're working together with other people to see how we can best solve their issues and promote the PocketQube. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much, and hopefully some of that is to where you live.